In this episode, I'm joined by Sang-gyé A-tsal, ex-dancer, New York Jazz Club owner, and Brevet Lama in the gTer lineage of Tibetan Buddhism. We discuss Sang-gyé's personal journey through Santeria, Sufism, and Vedanta, before eventually meeting her future teacher, Ngak'chang Rinpoche. Sang-gyé discusses her transformative time spent in Nepal with Kunzang Dorje Rinpoche and recounts her completion of the esoteric practice of phowa under the guidance of Jomo Sampel. We learn about how to practice Vajra Romance outside of a partnership and explore Sang-gyé's passion for the physical practices of Kum Nye. So without further ado, Sang-gyé A-tsal. Sang-gyé A-tsal, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here.
So I'm curious how it was you first became interested in meditation and, in your case, Tibetan Buddhism.
That's when I was reflecting on that. It's funny to think how it started. I was brought up Catholic, but not serious Catholic. My parents were interested in the mystical side of Catholicism, but I always loved things in Catholicism, like the incense and the symbolism and things like that. So I had that background, and then I just believed in meditation. So I remember when I was about 13, I gave a meditation party for my friends, which did not go over very well. I cooked food and things, and then we went and sat in the living room, and I said, so now we just sit. And you could see everybody sort of going, this is really boring, so that didn't go down very well. But looking back at that, I think wish I had met my Rinpoches then, Ngak'chang Rinpoche and Khandra Rinpoche then, because then I went off on a lot of other paths trying to find what I wanted. And so I was always interested. The saints in Catholicism were really something I was very interested in, which I think hooks a little bit into the Mahasiddhas tradition as well. They interested me much more than God, or and perhaps Jesus as a Mahasiddha too and then rolling fast forwarding through some New Age things, and then I became Sufi for a while. Before that, I touched on the Nichiren Daishonin Buddhism for a little bit, and I played with Santeria for a while, which is the sort of voodoo thing. So, and I was Sufi when I had a really good friend who was always bopping around and going to different teachers and things, and she actually found Ngak'chang Rinpoche and Khandra for me. So we were in a little cabin. I was living in New York at the time, and I'd come back to Britain to visit her. And we were in a little cabin in Dorset, and she had bought a cassette of the yogic song of the gTer. And she played that to me, and I just had an incredible night's sleep. I don't remember why it was incredible, but I just woke up and thought, this is the thing. I have to find this. I have to know what this is. And it had an address on it in New York. So I went and sat with the group there for 3 months before I met Ngak'chang Rinpoche. And I met him at a weekend retreat, open retreat. And I just decided I wanted to be an apprentice then. So the rest is history.
That's fascinating. Let's go back over some of those points.
Mm-hmm.
How did you learn to meditate at 13? What sort of meditation were you leading your friends in?
Yes, that's what I think is interesting, because looking back, I think it was Shiné. I just knew that you just sit, and you don't do anything else. You just sit and you let thoughts come and go. And then I unlearned that and had to learn it all over again. So it wasn't easy when I found the Four Naljos or Shiné. It wasn't easy again, because I'd done a lot of sleepy Shiné, in the interim, just sort of phasing out. And
so I assume then you hadn't read about that anywhere. It's
No.
just as what you just sort of came to you at 13. Yeah, that's interesting. Perhaps some people are not so familiar with Shiné and what you mean by sleepy Shiné, and what you mean there by having had to unlearn all of the learning you'd done from 13. Can you talk in a bit of detail about that arc?
Yes, so in the gTer, there's what are called the Four Naljos, which are the Ngundro for Dzogchen, for the practice of Dzogchen, and they're called the Four Tsingadzin. And these are in the book Shock Amazement that Rinpoche and Ngak'chang have written. And basically, so the Shiné is that you're just sitting, that you sit and you allow thoughts. Shiné means remaining uninvolved. So you just sit in a comfortable position and your eyes are slightly, just slightly open, and you just allow thoughts to do what they want to do, to come and go. And eventually the idea is that you will stop having thought, which is called stabilized Shiné. And the premise of that is that we're addicted to thought to prove that we exist. So it's not that thought's a bad thing, it's just that we use thought as a reference point. And so this gives us a chance we're like thought junkies, to just experience ourselves without that, and to experience that we exist beyond this thinking machine that we are. So going back to sort of what I had done, I was interested in sort of Vedantism for a while as well. And I won't blame it on them, but I think there's much more an idea of going inside and separating from the world with that. In Dzogchen practices and in Shiné, you are still completely aware of everything else that's happening, the sound. So you're not blocking anything out. If someone walked into the room and you were practicing and talked to you, you would say, oh, you startled me, because you'd just be aware of everything that was happening. So the sleepy Shiné is when that sort of starts, when you're not having thought, but you're also not aware. So so it can be, and that's, I think, where a teacher is very helpful, because a teacher you can think that things are happening at that point, but a teacher can say, well, actually, I think that sounds like sleepy Shiné, and then you just work through that. But sleepy Shiné is a sign of that something is that you're practicing, so it's not a bad thing either. But it can be a dead end if it's all that you do, which I think was a little bit where I was headed before I found this, and also before I found Sufism, because Sufism doesn't have meditation as such. So
after 13, you went into Vedantism at that point. What's the chronology? Because you did list a lot of interesting things. I mean, Vedantism, Sufism, Santeria. That's an interesting resume. Can you take us a little bit through that timeline?
Yes. Well, actually, at 13 and right into my 30s, and even now, the arts were the main thing for me. So I was, at the same time, I was very obsessed with dancing. I became a dancer. So the arts were happening at the same time. So I don't really remember much until probably my 20s, when I started sort of exploring more. So that's probably when I read things I loved Shiva, and I just read stories about Shiva and practices. I can't even remember. I got involved with rebirthing when it was around, became a rebirthing instructor, because I was trying to find a profession that would support my looking for acting work and dancing work. And then Sufism sort of came in after that. And I joined Pir Vilayat, who's now deceased. I think his son has taken over Sufi Order of the West. I think so. I was just reading sort of lots of things. I didn't come across Buddhism so much. As I say, when I was a dancer in London at Pineapple Dance Studios, there were 2 dance teachers there who practiced Nichiren Daishonin Buddhism. I think it's split and changed since then, but I don't know that much about it now. But I know it's developed a bit. But a lot of people, they were choreographers, so they would hire people, and they would always hire the people that were the Buddhist practitioners first. So I knew about it from there. But then I was waitressing, and I met a crazy, fantastic Italian who turned a very bad night into a good night just by being fun and lovely. And he told me about it as well. So I went to some of their meetings and things. And that really wasn't for me, but the practice itself was very interesting. And it also had the idea that you can be liberated in one lifetime. So I think that's the Diamond Sutra. It's Japanese in base, I think. I didn't learn a lot about it. You probably know more about it than I do, but I did the practice, not just the main chant, but also they have a book that you run through. So I think what all of these things did for me was, even the Santeria, was I always had experiences with all of them, you know, quite strong, I guess in Buddhism we'd call them nyams. And so I think what it helped me realize is that whatever your view is what your reality is. I mean, when you start, you know, Santeria I touched on, but, you know, when you can start to have experiences of things like that, and you just realize it's just whatever I'm thinking, whatever I'm believing can happen. And I think that was a really good basis for the Buddhist practice that I have now.
Can you talk a little bit more about what you mean by that, perhaps in the context of Santeria, in terms of believing things and they happen and so on? I
think at one point I lit a candle, and, you know, you could do, all of this could be imagination, but I lit a candle and an amazing thing happened with a bee, where it was, you know, almost trying to kill itself in the candle, you know, and there was this, you know, nothing like that's ever happened before or since. So it is interesting that, to me, that, you know, what we put out there is what we get back. And very simply, you know, as a lot of people teach, you know, very simply, then if we put out kindness, we get that back. You know, it's sort of, I've simplified. I don't need the sort of the Santeria experiences of strong voodoo stuff. What's the story of the bee? Well, that was it really, just that it was, I can't remember the exact practice I was doing, but it was something, the candle was signifying a very strong, a very powerful Santeria being. And in Santeria, a lot of it is about sacrifice, you know, and it was just as if this bee was trying to go to the flame and be killed in the flame. It was very odd. Anyway, so I sort of gave up around that point. I thought, this is not for me. It was all a bit too gross, I think, as in big. What was it that brought you to New York? The arts again. So I started a jazz club, and I also like to sing. So I'm now with Savage Cabbage, the band that Ngak'chang Rinpoche has. So the next step was I danced, I tried acting, then I wanted to sing, and I started a jazz club in Leicester Square one night a week in London, and I'd met a lot of jazz musicians through that. And so I sort of moved to New York to further that and act a bit more and dance, and then I got into African dance when I was in New York. So I think when I met Ngak'chang Rinpoche, I was very involved in African dance too. So. What sort of African dance? West African, I assume? Yes, yeah, very good. West African, Senegalese, so Sabar. Yeah, which is very different form to other African dance, isn't it? So. Wow, okay. So tell us then about that first meeting with Ngak'chang Rinpoche. I believe he was giving a slideshow. He used to show slides in those days and talk about what they were. And so I had experienced 3 months formally of his Sangha that was very small at the time in New York, and so friendly and so helpful. And by that time I'd read some books, and he was just extremely kind and very simple. Just I think what threads Ngak'chang Rinpoche, Khandro Dechen Rinpoche, Kyabje Kunzang Dorje Rinpoche, Jomo Sampel Rinpoche, the ones that I've met that are great practitioners, is this incredible, they're extraordinary by how simple they are. You know, they're not trying to be anything. And I think so it's very hard to describe that, because usually, going back to Santeria, you know, we want magic and we want to talk about, you know, lights and all this kind of thing, and I don't know, apparitions. But actually what's blown me away and inspired me so much by all of those people I mentioned is that they just are who they are, and that simplicity is it's extremely moving, and it just has made me want to be that as well. Just people who have no, I don't know what to call it. When you put things on, no airs or graces or
pretense, artifice.
Pretense, that's the word. Thank you. Yeah, exactly. And with that, extremely kind and generous. So that's sort of what came across. And I don't know why I decided that I wanted to be an apprentice so quickly, but I think it's, if the way I shop is like that as well. I can never find things when I want them. But if I see a piece of jewelry, once I found a fantastic amber bracelet in New York, and I was really poor. And I don't know how I got the money. I just talked to friends and things, but I knew I had to have that bracelet, but it's not logical. I just sort of tended to know. So that's what it was like. I think it was just, this is it. And I think the experience with the Sangha, because funnily enough, I had always said, I will never have a guru, I'll never follow a guru, and I'll never be part of a Sangha. So whenever I say never, watch out. But the Sangha was so down to earth as well, and so friendly, and I think our Sangha is an amazing Sangha, worldwide. So I think that helped as well. I thought, well, these are people that are fun, that I just want to mix with, I want to get to know. So that helped as well.
Interesting. So when you became an apprentice, is there an application process there, or was it just simply a conversation? And then as that began to happen, what practices were you doing? What were those initial weeks and months like? I mean, this was how many years ago? 20 years ago, you say?
I think it was 1993. My maths isn't that good. It's hard to remember what I was doing then. So there wasn't an application process then. There is now. So I had an interview with Rinpoche, and I don't really remember what we discussed. I do remember saying to him that I tended to sort of land on things and then disappear again, and that I wasn't good at sticking with things. So I sort of pre-warned him of that. And so that's interesting, 27 years later, or whatever it is. And then he just asked, he said that all contradiction, and he asks, is that we're kind and considerate to each other as Sangha members and in the world. So that was the only stipulation that he gave, which of course is quite a difficult one to follow if you take it seriously. So, and then there was a week retreat happening after that. And the same friend that had introduced me to the cassette tape was in New York visiting me. So I abandoned her for the days of the next retreat, but she completely understood. But Rinpoche said, well, good, there's a retreat happening now, so you can come next week to that. And so that was wonderful. And the main thing I remember about that retreat was, apart from all the sort of spiritual teachings and things that were just flying over my head, was the celebration that we had. So when we finish a retreat, we have a celebration, which is a way of sort of reintegrating back into the world, and people perform. And people who aren't performers perform. And there's no judgment. You're just experiencing, as there's the audience, you experience it without judgment. And I just thought that was an amazing, being a performer, I thought it was amazing for an audience to not judge, and to experience people who didn't think of themselves as performers, giving exquisite performance. So that was really what I remember most about that retreat.
And what was the relationship like then going forward? Presumably some sort of correspondence, some instructions in terms of practicing and reporting, and then further retreats, I assume.
Yes, that's right. So always the Shiné practice, or Fornaljuas, and mantra recitation. I can't remember what order these came in. And of course, living in New York, Kondra didn't come over so often then, but Rinpoche came twice a year. And yes, so, and in those days there were no computers, so we were corresponding by mail. I feel old. And then, so I think, and then I started this journey of going backwards and forwards between Britain and New York. So I came back and lived here for a while and met the British Sangha, and then went back there. And that sort of continued until I think 1998 was my first pilgrimage to, I knew by 98 that I wanted to get ordained. And so that was my first pilgrimage to Nepal. And that was one that Rinpoche and Dekchen weren't on. It was led by Ngak'chang and I can't remember who else, but I remember she picked me up at the airport. And that's when we first met Kunzang Dorje Rinpoche and Jomo Sampel Rinpoche. So that just felt like a real leap into it being very real and home and basically my life. So that was really wonderful.
What do you mean by that? A leap into your home and your life?
I think a lot of people say this who've practiced in the West and then traveled to Nepal. And Nepal, it's interesting because when Rinpoche talks about being there in the 70s, he talks about it wasn't, there were no shops and it wasn't like this. And now I'm talking like that about it now, because 20 years ago I went there and it was so different. Now it's so much more modern and so much more busy and built up. But what's still there is that you're not a novelty. There, I mean, other people are practicing other religions, but Buddhism is one of the major religions. And so people recognize you as a Buddhist practitioner. They understand why you're there, what you're doing. So especially now, because we've been going there for such a long time, wearing the robes. When I first went there, obviously I wasn't wearing the robes, and not many of us were. But so, yeah, and I love the East. I love that change. I love culture shock. I love having to change how I am and what I do and what my sense of hygiene is and dirt and all of that. So I like the difference as well. But that's more a personal thing. I think I just think I felt very like this was my path now. This is it. And I knew I was working towards ordination probably at that point as well. I was ordained in 2000. So then in 1999, I went back and I stayed at Yeshe Gyalpo with Kyabje Kunzang Dorje Rinpoche and Jomo Sampel Rinpoche. And I stayed where they were staying. And I completed the 3-week retreat. I don't think I'd done we have certain stipulations that we have to have fulfilled before we are ordained. And so I finished everything in that 3 weeks and then was ordained after that.
By Kunzang Dorje Rinpoche and Jomo Sampel?
No, I was ordained. I was in Holland, and I think, I can't remember, a lot of us were ordained, but we were ordained by Ngak'chang Rinpoche and Kandra Rinpoche. But it was just that Kunzang Dorje Rinpoche and Jomo Sampel Rinpoche allowed me to stay there, and that was the first time I'd sort of had a more personal experiences with them. So Kunzang Dorje Rinpoche played with me a lot.
I'd love to hear all about that. Kunzang Dorje Rinpoche has come up on the podcast a number of times. Guests have mentioned him. Yeah. Not only gTer people, others have also mentioned him, meeting him in Kathmandu, in Nepal. And of course, your teacher, Ngak'chang Rinpoche, writes about him extensively in the book Wisdom Eccentrics.
Yes, fabulous book.
So I'm curious, give us the stories, give us the details. What was it like? Tell us all about it.
Different. What I find interesting is when different Sangha members talk about it, it's different as well. So clearly, and this is what Ngak'chang Rinpoche and Kandra Rinpoche do as well. And it's what I love about this lineage of Gokha Chonglede, but of the teacher-student, is that they play with your individual neurosis, your individual ability to flip that into enlightenment. So of course it is different with everybody, but sometimes when people talk about them, I think, well, I didn't see that person, or and I have to say them because of course Kunzang Dorje Rinpoche was an incredible being, but Jomo Sampel Rinpoche is as well. And I've spent a lot of time with her now that Kunzang Dorje Rinpoche has died. And she seems to embody the two of them, which is very interesting as well. But so I was young and I was quite nervous, and there was a translator at the time. And sometimes Kunzang Dorje Rinpoche would just say, you know, you can like tell her to come and she can come and visit now or something. And Jomo Sampel would either be there or not. So one thing that he did was, my name was Sang-gyé before I was ordained. And whenever I think of Kunzang Dorje Rinpoche, I think of him sort of dancing. You know, he always seemed to be, even when he was sitting, he just seemed huge and always to be dancing and moving and just alive from the inside out. And so there was always that sense of play, even when he wasn't necessarily playing. But this one time he came downstairs and he said, "Oh, you Khandro, you're not Khandro. You know, Khandro, I don't know why you're called a Khandro. I've never seen a Khandro, and you're definitely not a Khandro." So he just went on and sort of beat any special feelings I had about myself down, but in a really gentle, lovely, fun way. I mean, and I was just, you know, I think most of the time was just thrown into complete emptiness, which is a wonderful experience. And then we used to, some afternoons, we would just sit, and I didn't know what to do, so I just showed him my dictionary, my English Tibetan dictionary. And so we would just look at different words and laugh about those. And but I realized very recently, thinking about my time with them and him when we were alone, and I think, you know, sort of the more one practices, I realized that that's sort of, everything was transmission in a sense. Well, not in a sense, I believe everything was transmission, and this beautiful aspect that even if you don't get it at the time, you know, 20 years later, it's still there to be discovered. And it might even, the feeling of what it was that was being transmitted could change. But there's play in every moment. There's something arising in every moment. And if we're not sort of trying to keep this linear idea of ourselves intact, you know, and I think that that's what was happening. It was just extraordinary, because it was whatever was there to be conjured with, to be appreciated, to be enjoyed, was what was happening.
Would you say that was the heart of the transmission that still resonates to this day?
I think so. I find it changes, but I think so. Perhaps it changes as we're able to, as we get to a point where we can perceive it or something.
How has it changed for you over the decades?
Well, I think I knew in the beginning, you know, when it was happening, that it was extraordinary. I just didn't know anything more than that. And knew it threw me into emptiness, which was something I was trying to discover. So that was good too. But yes, I think that the more that I worked with Ngak'chang Rinpoche and Khandro Dachin Rinpoche, perhaps the more I've understood that there's been a beautiful sort of echoing, coming back to them as teachers, and perhaps we take them a little for granted, or their presence is, you know, they're so, even if we don't take them for granted, their presence is so natural that it's easy, you know, to forget that how amazing they are. And then of course one does remember that. But I think every time I've visited Jomo Sampel and Kunzang Dorje Rinpoche, I've realized I have that here as well.
When you mentioned that he was teasing you about not being a Khandro, and even though you were called Khandro and so on, and you were thrown into emptiness, that's an interesting phrase. Perhaps you could unpack it a bit. What do you mean by the word emptiness? And how would it be that someone teasing you would throw you into such an experience?
I guess we all experience emptiness differently. So perhaps, but there wasn't I suppose with everything that Kunzang Dorje Rinpoche did, one could become, or any great Lama, one could become completely insulted or nervous, or when I think of Kunzang Dorje Rinpoche, it always makes me laugh. And that's quite interesting given the stories that Ngak'chang Rinpoche has told. Because I almost feel like we were the grandchildren, that then he was really lovely too, you know. But I was quite a nervous, serious person, and still to this day, when I think of him, it makes me laugh and makes me feel sort of quite confident. But I think that it was the experience of not relating to self or to the person who was creating the situation as one usually would. So in some way, you become empty, because you're not even the self that you usually are. You're not trying to cling on to whatever you think you are. And also, sometimes I didn't know what to think or say or do, so it was just completely empty, which is quite a freeing experience.
So it sounds like you're using the word emptiness there as a sort of flexibility of self-identity, as well as a state of not knowing what to say or what to think, kind of mouth agape state.
Yes, probably. Or just the emptiness of, you know, when we're in love, we're empty. When we're laughing, we're empty. You know, so I think I mean empty of self in lots of ways, that we're not self-conscious, but also empty of thought as one experiences in Shiné, you know, just that emptiness of that we try to discover when we're practicing Shiné as well.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Is there a Tibetan word that you're thinking of that you're translating as emptiness? Or is it the sort of interpretation one might encounter in the gTer mainly?
I'm not that scholarly, but that'd be a good question for Ngak'chang Rinpoche, Khandra Deja Rinpoche, but no, I think I just mean the experience of emptiness, of being empty. But it is all the same, in a sense, when you're not experiencing. I think that's what sort of Dzogchen's basically working with the elements totally, or, you know, and Shiné is the first of the four Naljaws that then thought is brought back after that. But I think experiencing oneself as empty then helps one to arise in the moment as anything. So there's the freedom that happens through that. So I wasn't sort of thinking of technical terms, just experiential emptiness, which is helpful to discover.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
It's very interesting.
And in those days, very much what I wanted to discover, of course, because I'd just started sitting and didn't have many experiences of no thought at all. So I think that was probably why that was quite profound for me then as well. Mm. And I think being a performer and a dancer, you're taught to look at yourself from the outside in. You know, as a dancer, particularly I grew up practicing ballet. I mean, you think you're clocking at least 150 things about your appearance just doing this. You know, you have to know where your toes are, your navel, your everything. So I think that I forget that, but I think there was quite a lot of, you know, self-consciousness there that probably Kunzang Dorje Rinpoche blew open quite a bit, I think.
By prodding it, you mean, or by giving you an opportunity to react differently?
Yeah, I think part of it, once again, is view. So I knew he was an incredibly great Lama, and you know, my teacher's teacher and my teachers had talked about him with such love and devotion. So, you know, I went there with devotion. So that's one thing. So anything that he would have done would have been fine by me. But so I think it was, and then it was also what, you know, how he played with that, which at the time was, I think that self-consciousness wasn't even, I didn't even know I was that way then, I think, you know, that's only when it starts to fall away, I think, that you know that. So it didn't feel threatening in any way. It just felt, I felt very accepted. And then you just tend, as I said earlier, you know, when we're laughing, we tend to forget to worry about what we look like or who we are. So it's just that complete freedom of just being in the moment.
You mentioned neurosis before, and something that I hear from lots of people especially people in the arts, is that their neurosis is intimately linked with their creative process. And sometimes the creative process actually turns the lead of neurosis into gold somehow. And so it's sort of integrated in the creative process somehow. I've heard that from lots of artists of various stripes. And to relax or extract one's neurosis can be destabilizing, or can take away some of the key ingredients of the creative process, such as the impetus to create at all. I'm curious, as you went through these changes, and it sounds like quite deep personality changes, what effect, if any, there was on your work as an artist, as a dancer, as a performer, and so on?
It's so interesting you bring that up, because I was recently talking to Ngak'chang Rinpoche and Kunzang Dorje Rinpoche about this, because I'm always flabbergasted that there aren't more artists as part of the Arotea. More people are coming in, and some of us obviously were professional artists, still are. And that was one of my muses about it. Is it because people feel that if they lose the neurosis, then they lose the impetus for art? But the thing about the Dzogchen practice is that we have the tantric arts, which are the Thangka painting and the dance, and different statue making. But then very much the way that Rinpoche and Dechen teach is through the arts, so through the sense fields and experiencing the sense fields. And it's not that, I think it's freeing to lose this sort of self that you identify with, that the art has to come out of. But when you just start to appreciate, this is what they have helped me to learn, that when you appreciate everything in life, when you start to appreciate things and to, if you're creative, then you're aligning yourself with the sense fields and the senses and the sense fields. And so then you're just continually creative, because ideas come up and you can't not have ideas then. And then it doesn't matter, then there's the self that created it in that moment, but there doesn't have to be an angst self. I think as artists, we're so cheated by having to believe that about ourselves, And it was also, as you were talking, I was thinking interesting, because in Tantra, of course, you're taking the neurosis and seeing its enlightened side through the elements. But art, I guess that's sort of what you were describing with what artists feel that they can do. But for me personally, it's really interesting that, I started out a dancer, then I nearly became a sculptor. I got into a sculpture school, but I deferred because I didn't know whether I wanted to dance or sculpt. And then I acted and sang, and I never thought they should be separate. And part of what I sang with a woman from South Africa too for a while, and we sang in Zulu and Xhosa. And she said to me, I said, I love African culture because you don't separate. You don't say, now you have to be a singer, or what are you going to be when you grow up? You're going to be a dancer. It's all together and everyone can do it all. Excuse me. And that's what I feel has happened with, I wanted a spiritual practice. And what I didn't say was I always wanted a spiritual practice that I knew this from early on too, that would encompass my entire life, that wasn't just going to mass once a week. And so of course that's, it's perfect for me, because the arts, so now I'm doing more art of the arts than I ever did. The Thangka painting, the singing with Savage Cabbage, making tantric sort of implements. There's much more than that, but I can't think of them. The dances, there's just, in the Arotea we have, excuse me, we have the dances of the actual, the ritualistic dances, but then we have the dance of, it's gone out of my head, sorry. The natural dignity practices that Vajra Dorje and Mezel Gelmo teach. So there's just, you can just completely, jump in and enjoy all of them. So that's what it's given me. It hasn't necessarily given me a way to make money out of it, but it's given me a way that I feel that everything can be art, and you saw that when you interviewed Rinpoche and Dechen, I think, with their incredible, their house, and how everything is a piece of art. And then that discovery that art and appreciation are so linked. So basically, and view again, and everything can be appreciated, so everything can be art.
So a big part of the gTer that I think most people will be aware of in terms of information on this website and in the way it operates is this idea of teaching couples and this idea of Vajra Romance, a particular way of looking at relationship within the context of Dzogchen and gTer and so on. I'm curious what your take or experience with that side of the teaching has been.
Yes. Well, everything, of course, in Buddhism is emptiness and form, isn't it? So, and then when you start so then everything is described in that way. And so, of course, you have this wonderful opportunity with male and female to teach in that way. But I think it is the Khandro Nyidom Melongyo teachings are amazing teachings, which are the couple mirroring teachings. So I've been single most of my life. I love being single. So, one could think, well, then I miss out on all those teachings. But it is possible to view the phenomenal universe, the entire phenomenal universe as, in my case, method display or form. And that's something that's transmitted, but can't really be explained. And that, I think, is what's so interesting about reading The Heart of the Sun and Moon, which is the book about this that Ngak'chang Rinpoche and Khandro Dechen Rinpoche have written. And so it's more, you just have to feel your way into it. And then a man would view the phenomenal universe as empty or wisdom display. And then, of course, that also happens with Sangha members too, that a male Sangha member, that all my male Sangha members, I can sort of, although it's not romantic, but I can still appreciate their method display. So I'm not sure what else to say about it, but if you ask me things.
Yeah, well, could you give an example of what you mean by appreciating your fellow Sangha members' method display?
Yeah, this is where it's more poetic than it's so once you start sort of trying to talk about what it is, it can be concretized, and then become a bit like a how-to book. So that's why it's a little bit difficult. And I think Rinpoche and Khandro Dechen Rinpoche do it so much better in wearing the heart of the sun and moon than I could. But I guess the way that it could be the way that somebody walks. It could be the way a woman walks as well, that the turn of the heel, the shape they make, the mechanism of how the hip works. It could be something like that. It could be the way they solve a problem. It could be, just, what they do, how they do things. So you're seeing it as form rather than as empty. And then that same thing can be seen through the eyes of a man looking at it as wisdom display in a woman.
Can you think of a representative, if not definitive, example of that?
I don't know, with the phenomenal universe, perhaps it's easier to talk about that. One could look at a mountain range and the way the water's carved a shape in the rock or something, and be aware of sort of the years that it took to create the mountain. And whereas I suppose, I don't look at the world as wisdom display, so, and forgive me, my Rinpoches, if I'm saying this incorrectly, but so perhaps that would be more how it feels, a sense of the just sort of inherent beauty of that, or the see, I'm not as good at this. So it's more wisdom display. It's more empty, the way that you would view it. Be better to ask a man about that. But
fair enough. All right. Well, let's talk about phowa. From when I was visiting Ngak'chang Rinpoche and Kandro Dechen to film an interview with them at their home, they mentioned you in that interview, and they had discussed, maybe I'll inset that part actually, that'd be quite cool to have a clip here. And they mentioned that one of their students at that time was in Kathmandu with Jomo Sampel and was engaged in the phowa retreat practices with her, and said that you had achieved the sign of the success with that practice, which is quite a remarkable sign actually, and that they had recently received a WhatsApp picture attesting to that fact. I'll let you explain it all. So can you talk a bit about that retreat and the significance of having achieved that sign?
Significance. Well, first of all, just about the picture, that was thanks to Kalsang, who actually said, now take a picture, because I would never have thought to do that. So I was just so in the moment that, so that great gratitude to her for that. But she's probably more used to having people achieve it around her than I was. So where to start? Well, I had heard about phowa many years ago from a student of Rinpoche's, who's not a student anymore in New York, who had said, asked if he taught it. And at that point, he just said, no, I don't teach it. And I think she described it was, you know, it was very early days for me. So I hadn't really heard much about Buddhism. And she said, you know, go up, pop out of the top of your head. And I thought, oh, that sounds like the thing. And then I forgot it, just seemed to have a connection to it. And then I forgot about it. And then over the years, I'd asked Rinpoche and Dechen if I could learn it. And finally, a transmission was given. And I should say here that Ngak'chang Rinpoche and Dechen's phowa is often thought of as quite secret. And but Ngak'chang Rinpoche and Kandro Dechen Rinpoche have, I guess, a system where if other Tibetan lamas are teaching it to the public, then and talking about it, then they feel like, well, we may as well also talk about it. And so that is the reason that phowa is talked about. I actually came back from it thinking I wouldn't be discussing it with anybody, and didn't realize that it was all open now and everyone talks about it and it's on YouTube. And so I was way behind. But so I think it was being taught in the 70s and 80s by Chagdab Tulku and Ayang Rinpoche. So that is the reason, that because I think some people still do believe it's quite a secret thing and shouldn't be discussed. So, but I guess my reason for being happy to discuss it is that I think it's wonderful for people to know it's possible. I had wanted to practice a month retreat, and I was just talking to Ngak'chang Rinpoche and Kandro Dechen Rinpoche about what I should practice, and they said, well, perhaps this would be the time to practice phowa then. So they gave me I'd already received the ngundro, so I spent a month in London during the summer practicing the ngundro for the phowa, and then I had already planned to go to Nepal. I've been trying to visit Nepal every year, so so then that was the same. It's like, well, perhaps you could, you know, visit Jomo Sampel Rinpoche and practice phowa and complete it when you're there. So it was very much a sort of backwards and forwards between Jomo Sampel Rinpoche and Kalsang, also, who I mentioned, who's lived with, she's a student of Kunzang Dorje Rinpoche and Jomo Sampel, and has lived with them on and off for years. And she's the person who has the house that Jomo Sampel lives in, and she's amazing. Was amazing help and wonderful as well. So I would ask Jomo Sampel Dechen Rinpoche questions, and then, you know, she'd say, well, I think you should ask Ngak'chang Rinpoche and Kandro Dechen Rinpoche about that. And so there was a sort of a WhatsApp exchange as well. Thank goodness for WhatsApp that happened, which was quite nice, of them saying backwards and forwards what I should do. But so yes, that was, I think, 3 weeks in retreat. I don't think it took that long, but I've sort of lost what to say about it, really. But Jomo Sampel was amazingly supportive. Yeah, asked me questions.
What was the retreat schedule? And also, what's the lineage of phowa? Is it from the Aro Terma? Ngak'chang Rinpoche mentioned that it's visualizing Yeshe Tsogyal mantras, and presumably some sort of movement of the energies in the central channel, at least if it's like regular kind of phowa. So what was the retreat schedule like, and sort of practices were you engaged in, and how did you begin to know it was working?
Yes, that's a good question, because I think that phowa is an interesting, I've done a lot of long retreat before, but I think it's interesting because you're trying to make something happen. And so can be a bit neurotic as well, I guess, so it's good not to be neurotic about it. But there is this sense that you're trying to discover something happening. And I think that's also where it was wonderful to practice it in Nepal, and anybody else some people have practiced it since. And that's why people go, well, it's not why, but people go to Jomo Sampel for her to recognize the signs. And but I think it is very helpful I actually stayed in a hotel that run by Nepalese people who were so supportive, and the young man is interested in Buddhism. So I was extremely supported by them. They knew that I'd be practicing there. And so I did 4 tun. Tun is sort of just like a time that 4 of 2 hours, so 8 hours of only the phowa. The arote, going back to your question about the lineage, yes, it comes from the arotema. What's rather lovely about this one, it also comes through from Jomo Chimipema, taught it to Aralingma as a familial lineage as well. So we have sort of both in there. And then it was realized in envisionment from Yeshe Tsogyal by Kunzang Aralingma. So it's sort of, there's 2 connections to it, which is quite lovely. It is arote, which means it doesn't have any long sadhanas. It's dzogchen in style. And so I just practiced that 8 hours a day, and then occasionally, most days I would visit Jomo Sampel Rinpoche, and Karlsang would translate, and we'd talk a bit about my practice, or we'd just sort of sit and be together or drink tea together. So there was this sort of very lovely, normal time with intense practice, which I think is really lovely for a Westerner to experience, because it's I think we think we have to practice all the time, and we get very serious about it. And the way that Tibetans are, those stories I told before, it's everything is practice. And then so it's not separate, even though you have these quite intense sessions of practice all day long. So I didn't really know what to expect as far as the signs. And so Karlsang was very clear, and Jomo Sampel were very clear about where you'll get sort of, itching or headaches, or they just told me what would happen. And I mean, I think to the point when my head was looked at, I still wasn't sure, although I was. So then that was quite lovely as well, the way that the kusha grass is actually put into the hole as a point of sort of to show that it's been accomplished. And kusha grass is interesting because it's considered quite sacred, but it's also used as a broom, so it's I think it's put on some systems put it under the pillow for dream yoga. And but Jomo Sampel was busy, and I think we practiced sok first, and Karlsang had called me up, and so she said, come over for sok, and then we'll get Jomo Sampel to check your head. And then Jomo Sampel had to go somewhere. So we finished the sok, and there were more people there than there usually would be. And people were helping Jomo Sampel get dressed, and she was looking for a purse and everything. And then thanks to Karlsang said, I said, well, perhaps not today. And she said, no, you stay. We check. And so then in the middle of all of this wonderful chaos, which is very, typical of Nepal, she asked if it could be checked. And so there was a Lama there who spends time with Jomo Sampel Rinpoche, sometimes called, I've forgotten his name, sorry, Tamshi Rinpoche. And Jomo Sampel asked him to check my head for me, so he did. And then she said something to him, which I think was go and get the grass. And then he disappeared and just pulled a piece of the grass out of the broom and then put it in my head. And that was that. And then everyone went off shopping. So it was quite lovely that it wasn't, that it was just very normal as well. That I found that quite moving, actually, that it no big fuss is made. Now you've done that. That's good. Now get on with something else, or so not too much pomp and ceremony.
Yeah, well, I have a lot of questions after that. You're doing these 4 practice sessions a day, and there's no long sadhana, etc. So how are those practice sessions arranged? Are you doing physical exercises as well? Are you doing Shiné to kick things off? Or do you start straight away, hit the ground running with the phowa practice? And how long does the phowa practice take? Does it take 2 hours, or is it a 2-minute practice that you do for 2 hours repeatedly?
Yeah, I probably won't. I will teach publicly, and I'm very happy to. But I feel a little bit like if someone gives the entire method, then there's a little bit lost about. I mean, it's like if you watch a dress rehearsal of a play, there's a little bit lost about watching the actual play. That's a bad example, but anyway, bad analogy. But so I probably won't say what's actually involved. But yes, I did practice the 4 Naljaws every morning, because that's just our basic practice. So I practiced that in the mornings, and then I would just practice phowa. So which is it's something I would just loop. So basically, just keep going, and then very similar to what you described earlier anyway. And Yeshit Tsogyal mantra is a big part of it. So a lot of singing. You're singing Yeshit Tsogyal mantra, which is beautiful. And then I would put, because Kum Nye is so good for, if anything, sort of for sitting a lot and very intense practice. So the Kum Nye I would put that in. I'd sort of set the retreat that I would practice Kum Nye if I needed it. So needing it meaning, sort of feeling stuck or sitting too long or headaches or anything like that. So then I would practice that for probably half an hour when and where I needed to, which wasn't that often actually. But...
Kum Nye being the physical exercises.
Yes, the physical exercises, yes, which I'm heavily addicted to.
Having a completed, or, well, how would you say? What would the word be when whatever you've done with the phowa practice? What would be the word? Completed? Is that fair to say?
Completed, it's good, yeah.
Yeah. Having completed that phowa practice, how does that situate you now?
Yeah, maybe we should say achieve the sign, because I think that it's sort of the beginning of the practice rather than ta-da, I'm some great being who's achieved something. So it's really, I think it's like any practice. It's just what you're drawn to. I think that's what's interesting about just hearing it. I felt drawn to it years and years ago. And some traditions, it's obviously very different depending on the different yanas and also the different schools. So some schools I don't think they practice it again, or they practice it every 2 years to keep it fresh. Some people practice it all the time. I came back, and that's what I should mention, was asked, that's when Ngak'chang Rinpoche and Kunzang Dorje Rinpoche suggested that I become a Brevet Lama or a teacher, and then obviously teach this. So the idea is, which you probably already know, but with Kunzang Dorje and Rinpoche and Ngak'chang Rinpoche only taking a certain amount of students, then in order for other people who need personal teachers, the idea is that there's this Brevet Lama system where other students who know quite a lot can then give teachings, and we'll have specialties. And so then the whole of the gTer is sort of still covered, if you like. And we can send each other's students to each other. And obviously, while Rinpoche and Kunzang Dorje are still alive, then they also go to them for teachings. So I was asked to be part of that, and so I've continued the phowa.
Interesting. Yeah, I wonder if is there any provision for the passing on of the lineage of the gTer terma within one person? Or is it going to be, do you think, by necessity or maybe by design, diffused among lots of different lamas? Because, of course, from what I understand, Ngak'chang Rinpoche, from what he said, Ngak'chang Rinpoche received it all at once as a sort of spiritual download and has the entire system in his head. He tells that in quite a bit of detail when I interviewed him at his house. How on earth could that be passed down to one person? Will there be a lineage holder coming out of that after he has died? Or is there a provision for that? Is there much discussion about that within the Sangha?
Yeah, I think that's really a good question for them. I'm nearly the same age, so I'm not sure that I'll be around much longer. But there is provision obviously being made. But ordination, during ordination, everyone receives a download, if you like, of the entire gTer. It's just whether you have the capacity to know that, to practice that, to be that. But there is this also, even within, them still being here and still being alive, there is this, which I really treasure, this teaching that, the true Vajra relationship, which is they won't take more than a certain amount of students. And it's very much, goes back to the first spread, and the Mahasiddha, Rinpoche and Dechen have even said it's probably, what I think the number is 111, that's probably even too many. So, even if we're not talking about the future of the gTer, even sort of now, people who want that, who need that personal relationship with a Lama, something had to happen at some point so that they could have a teacher in that capacity. So that's part of the Brevet Lama system. I think, Brevet, that comes from, Rinpoche took that from a military term. So people would be a brevet major, which meant that they were a major with all the responsibility, but not the pay. And it doesn't mirror that exactly, but we were talking about this recently, and Ngak'chang Rinpoche was saying that in Tibet, this would also happen, that a Lama would say, well, go and learn that from Jigme, or you learn that from, Chinli or something like that. And even though they weren't actually called teachers and they didn't have their own students, but Rinpoche was saying there's no word for that in Tibet. That just happened. It's partially a tradition in that respect as well. And then, Brevet also implies that the lamas, there's a whole sector of, like ordination, there are things that we have to complete in order to become fully fledged lamas as well. But I do believe there's been provision made, but I'm not sure that I know enough about it to talk about it. But that will be the future, that all the Brevet Lamas will become lamas, and then they will also be teaching it, and perhaps there'll be connections to other schools or other lamas who also hold it.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
I mean, I found it very interesting that Rinpoche recently said, with sort of some of segments where people just come up as teachers and there's no lineage, then that's quite difficult for people when that person dies. And I had never thought of lineage in that respect as well. There's more and more I find out about lineage that I come to appreciate. But I thought that was very interesting as well, that, the lineage is bigger than the person. So when the person dies, all the students still have lineage, and I thought that, once again, was an amazing expression of compassion.
In what ways is that an expression of compassion?
Because I just realized the teacher wasn't even, that the practice was so much more important than the self, and also just that you make sure you don't leave your students with nothing, because if you're not there to teach it, then they have nothing. But with the lineages as they've been set up, there are other teachers to go to, or there are,
Okay, so you mentioned you're addicted to the Kum Nye practices.
Mm-hmm.
Could you perhaps talk a little bit about what they are and why it is you love them so much?
Yes, yeah. They're part of the Dzogchen Long Day series, which is the space, or so we have Dzogchen 7-day, Long Day, and Menak Day. And there are physical practices in each of those. Metzal Gyalmo gave a wonderful talk in Bhutan about it, which I think you can find on YouTube, so I won't go into that so much. But with the Kum Nye, the idea is that you you practice these different exercises that are extremely strange. You know, we wouldn't come up with exercises like this, and some limbs are locked and other limbs are flexible, and we're holding what's called the 4-da. Our eyes are wide open, focused in space, unmoving, the tongue suspended, and then you're turning your nose, and basically you're working with the Tsalung system and the different channels. And then after performing the exercise, you lie down in a meditation posture, and these exercises can create a rippling from the central channel which are known as zapnyams. So not nyams in the usual sense of just meditational experiences that we usually ignore, but zapnyams are a sort of environment or an experience through which Rigpa can be discovered. So really, you know, as incredible as Tumo, and totally accessible to, now with Zoom, to anybody who wants to learn it anywhere. So I think they're sort of I feel they're a bit undersung, but those of us who love them. And they're practiced, they're a little bit like, you know, like this that we did when we're young. So they have amazing benefits that have nothing to do with, you know, finding the non-dual state, such as, you know, bone density, lymph. I mean, having been a dancer and a Pilates teacher and all these things, I can sort of see all the other, they're incredible for depression, low libido. I mean, I could just go on and on about their benefits. They're performed, I mean, obviously when we practice them, teaching them, they're not performed this way, but as practice, they're performed naked, because the Tsa points are in areas that need to be accessed when you're naked. So all of those areas we think of as erogenous, but also around the eyes, the neck, the nose circling stimulates the Tsa, which are the spatial nerves, you know, under the arms, under the breasts, the navel, between the legs, that sort of, all those areas, which is why between the fingers, it's why we lie like this. And then the zapnyams are experienced as sort of weather, I guess, if you like, as sort of conditions outside the body. And then Rigpa can be discovered through those by dwelling in that state. So they're, and so this is, but they're very different. So I think for a lot of people, there's a bit of aversion. You know, sometimes you have to go through being a bit dizzy or a bit nauseous. But I truly believe they're extremely transformative and transforming, and lots of fun. If you're someone who likes, I think dancers or ex-dancers always like a challenge. It's like, yeah, come on, give me something I can't do, you know. And what's lovely about them is that, you know, unlike Tumo, you can do them, they're so spread. I could take a martial artist and give him something that he'd find difficult, you know, and then I could take someone who's 90 and still give them an exercise that they could do with Kum Nye. So, you know, it can be your practice right through to the end of your life, which I think is also what's quite amazing about it. And there's 111 exercises, so it's a huge body of exercises as well.
If people are interested in learning that, they could presumably contact you, and you teach that on Zoom, do you?
Thank you. Yes, yeah, I teach it on Zoom, and there are other people teaching it as well. But could definitely put people in contact with. I was just talking to someone in Australia about how we would make the time, you know, how we could set it so that they could learn it as well, and with the time difference. But yes, that's what's been really exciting about Zoom. And I wasn't sure at first, being sort of a teacher that likes to sort of go up and correct and change people, help people that way. But I've really enjoyed teaching on Zoom. So I think it does open it up for so many people to learn it and experience it. And obviously, at some point when we can, it's very important to still get that transmission in person. But it's a wonderful way to know whether you like them or not. So yeah, my email is fine for movingbeing111@gmail.com. They're up on the Arrow events site as well. And there are people in Germany and Austria and other places that teach them as well, Sweden.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. This has been very interesting. Is there anything that I haven't asked about that you'd like to say something about? Is there something left to say?
I don't think so. You're very good at instigating easy conversation. So thank you for that. No, I don't think so. Obviously, if you're in love with someone you really want, you just think it's the best thing. So I think it's so timely that Ngak'pas and Ngak'mas, the Ngak'chang Rinpoche is getting better known, because I think for Westerners, and I've met people in Nepal too who think that the only way to go deeply into practice is to have to become monastic. And I think it's extremely important for people in the West to know that you can go all the way. And, unfortunately we have this word lay, which is just so wrong, because lay means, not of the clergy, not ordained, and unprofessional. So we're not lay practitioners, we are Ngak'pas and Ngak'mas that go back to the first spread. So there's a huge lineage. I think Yeshe Tsogyal had nearly 3,000 Ngak'ma students. So yeah, I just say that I think it's very timely. I think what we have, and even if people don't go all the way into ordination, but to know, for the people in the West to know that you can live your life, you can have a job, and you can be really serious about practice. I think that's what I'm most grateful for, and want to let people know it exists if they're interested in it.
Sang-gyé A-tsal, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to another Guru Viking podcast. For more interviews like these, as well as articles, videos, and guided meditations, visit www.guruviking.com.